Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Mahler's most embarrassing work. This is going to be an interesting one. And the reason is because, well, there is no Mahler's most embarrassing work. Or, alternately, Mahler only wrote embarrassing work. It's either all or nothing. That's the marvelous magic of Mahler. Yes, for the alliteration as well. Yeah, why? Because Mahler's works are so all of a piece and so comprehensively, uniquely his, that you either like the style or you don't. And if you don't like the style, you may well find them embarrassing. Why are they embarrassing? It's an interesting question. Let's take the argument for the prosecution first, and then we'll look at the defense. The prosecution basically argued as follows in Mahler's lifetime, and occasionally since, because remember, history has decided Mahler won the argument. I mean, he was acquitted of being embarrassing, but there are still people who can't handle what he's serving up. And the reason that they find it embarrassing is because his style was, well, it's the conversation he had with Sibelius. When Sibelius said, the symphony is about the organic, interrelated logic of all of its constituent parts. And Mahler said, no, the symphony must be the world. It must embrace everything. It was Mahler's eclecticism which drove people absolutely nuts. People who heard his first symphonies when they were first premiered, and they were almost all like enormous failures, except for the second in spots, once in a while, they basically said that his music was completely derivative, that he stole from everybody, that everything sounded like everything else, that it was recognizable as being completely derivative, and so it was unoriginal, but simultaneously it was obnoxious because the things that he was using, the unoriginal things that he took, aside from borrowings from other composers and things, which proved his poverty of invention. He was a conductor. He just soaked up all this music that he conducted and then stuffed it into his symphonies, which, by the way, he did. But the upshot of that was that the elements that he borrowed, in addition to the things he conducted, were things that had no business being in a symphony. You have to remember that throughout the 19th century, there was a conflict, a huge conflict. We express it today between, the Brahmsian school and the Wagnerian school, the new German school and the conservative classical German school. But it was much more than that. It was much more general than that. To limit it to what was happening in Germany, I think, is to mistake the broadness of the issue. The issue was, quite simply, what was that which is appropriate to the theater, to theatrical music, acceptable in abstract instrumental music? Was it legitimate to use musical ideas which created imagery outside that of basic human emotions? Happy, sad, sad, happy, happy, sad. Is there anything else? If it's abstract, it's either happy or it's sad. I mean, there are all the various degrees, tragic, hysterical, But basically, there was that kind of music, and then there was theatrical music. And you can even take it back further, much further, to the old argument that the Catholic Church had for eliminating instrumental music from the church, eliminating anything that would create a diversion from keeping your mind focused on prayer, on the austerity of prayer, of what you should be thinking about, other things, spiritual things, that would not let you, focus on the materialistic world, women's voices, which means, sex, females, things like that. All of that stuff was supposed to be outside. And so in the 19th century, this became an issue because this conflict has always existed, right? And it was always a losing battle, basically, from the austerity people, actually, until maybe like now, the 20th century, when you have composers who are, self-consciously spiritual and austere, and they get attention because we're looking for self-consciously spiritual things to take the place of organized religion in our lives. So some of us are anyway. Some of us are not, the lucky ones. But the bottom line is, that in the 19th century, this basic fundamental argument between sensuality and austerity, or spiritual higher values and low base materialistic values, this conflict was reflected in the creation of the secular religion of Romanticism. The idea of the artist hero, the idea as a conduit of aesthetic truth, of virtue, a channel of God's whatever, and also in 19th century nationalist rhetoric as an embodiment of the strivings of the nation, the nation state, the body politic, which had to be worshipped, which was, a spiritual entity. Nowhere more so than in Germany, because Germany, of course, was in pieces. And so the idea of a German whole country sort of thing was nothing if not a religious concept. And so, bottom line is, we're talking about Mahler, right? So when Mahler started putting military marches and folk songs and klezmer music, as in the funeral march of the First Symphony, and tons of percussion, things that evoke other things, bird song and gongs and theatrical effects that would be used to create storms and cataclysms and all of that stuff. Threw all that stuff into his symphonies. People were offended. They thought that the language of music itself was being corrupted. And that was the accusation, that was labeled at Mahler. And that's an accusation which is perfectly valid today if the way you define the language of music is one which is based on exclusivity, based on what it is not, what it cannot contain, what it should not contain for various moral reasons. Of course, in Mahler's day, there was also, there was the anti-Semitism and all the other stuff that was mixed up with this, and all the nationalistic folderol that, which we still grapple with, frankly. When we think about music, sometimes it's the variations on it have been disguised, and we no longer recognize the origins. Just as we don't see the origin of the Wagner-Brahms controversy in the earlier controversy between music in the church, or what was suitable for worship and what was suitable for secular entertainment. But it all comes down to that. It all comes down to this quasi-religious view versus a secular view. And what makes it even more offensive to people who find Mahler embarrassing is the fact that he was nothing if not a spiritual guy. I mean, he was an enormously spiritual guy. I mean, his music sets sacred Latin texts, religious poetry. He talks about heaven and salvation and all of those things. And all of that's contained in the music. And it's done in music of unbelievable richness and color and abundance and well, all-encompassing, all-embracing comprehensiveness. And he was a genius, and his technique was second to none. So that's guaranteed to create horror in the minds of people. And I had discussions with composers about Mahler for just that reason. For example, one of the composers who I admired very much and who I was pretty friendly with was the Finnish composer Eino Juhani Rautavaara. Rautavaara could not stand Mahler. He was horrified by Mahler because I think he found the music to be somehow, corrupted and eclectic in a way that really, really bothered him. Certain conductors who wouldn't touch Mahler for whatever reason, Günter Wand, Celibidache, they find Mahler's place in German music and the history of the German symphony to be extremely problematic, because what he changed the German symphony into, what he attempted to do to it, how he attempted to broaden its scope, to open it up to all of these other influences. Now, in my view, Mahler did nothing more than what Haydn did in conceiving the symphony in the first place. Because if you look at the two composers, and I've said this before, you will find in Haydn all of the things that you find in Mahler. That is folk music, birds, vulgar and popular tunes, his concept of the symphony was as open-ended as Mahler's was, within, of course, his own stylistic parameters. But by the late 19th century, the stylistic parameters that Mahler had access to, that he could bring into his concept of the symphony, were so much more varied than they were in Haydn's day. So of course, the result is just all the more loud and extensive and offensive. So that is why, and it's a perfectly legitimate argument on both sides, as I said, Mahler is either completely embarrassing or nothing at all, and not at all embarrassing, marvelous, which I think he is, because his music is all of a piece. It's all expressive of his basic worldview, his Weltanschauung, and his aesthetic, and his vision of what music should be. And you hear it just as much in his songs as in his symphonies. And because there's so little of his music, I mean, only the 10.5 symphonies, including Das Lied von der Erde and the incompleted 10th, and 42 songs, and Das Klagende Lied and Blumina, one extra movement. I mean, that's it. That's all we have, the piano quartet movement. It's all echt Mahler, except for the piano quartet movement. All the rest of it could have come from no one else and contains all of the elements that those who find him to be embarrassing are embarrassed by. And so it's your choice. Is he an embarrassment, or is he absolutely one of the great transcendental musical geniuses? History has decided, but you are more than welcome to argue the opposite and to feel however you feel, of course. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.